Hello.
Hello,
Welcome.
hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome to
Hello.
Esoteric Book Club. Tonight we're discussing the third chapter of Ingenium, Frater, one of his later releases. This chapter is on the inner tools of magic. Um, so let's go around and do our impression of the chapter as always. Yeah, my impression was a good one. It was a very fluid read. I didn't have a lot of inner conflict as I had with, I think, the past two chapters, just a little bit, but not anything. But it did shed a lot of light into some of my workings lately and how to kind of adjust my approach to otherness in everyday situations. With tools that I feel like I already had, but just calling them by their name gives it a little bit more power and a little bit more intention behind what I've maybe already been naturally doing. Just kind of crystallizing and help honing that in a bit more. So overall, really appreciated it. I do have questions that we'll kind of be able to talk about towards the end of the chapter. But yeah, I think the shorter chapter of this book. So but it was also a very fluid read for me and a good overall impression. Cody, how was your impression of the chapter?
Yeah, as usual, I love it. I love this book. He's just gotten so good at um saying things succinctly that other authors have spent a lot of pages saying. Like he can distill it to some really pure essence, which I think is just, and using I think his ability to use these other really ancient authors to back his points, and that he's really referencing these old practices, and making, yeah, making just really good arguments for these things. Uh yeah, and I just really resonate with this magical style, with his path, which with the way he does things. It's like he's, I think, the first author that has really inspired me, in on a very specific magical path, where I felt really kind of vague about other things. He's his stuff is just setting me straight. It feels like he's setting a foundation that I never got, in a sense. Even though it is, I think we discussed, is kind of an advanced magical book, this. But of course, this combined with Holy Heretics maybe kind of sets more of a, um, and I would actually recommend maybe beginners to do both, or read maybe Holy Heretics first and then this, because Holy Heretics is very practical. It's theory, but then it's practical exercises. But they're written at similar times, and they're kind of he's with Holy Heretics, he's actually giving practices that directly correspond with what he's talking about in this, theoretically, in this book. So they go well together in that sense. So you can kind of, through practice, kind of understand what he's saying more, with this. And he even references that book in here, right? Especially in this chapter, I think. So that's really cool. So yeah, I just really like how well he distills these, I really pretty difficult ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. George, how was your impression of the chapter?
Very similar to last couple of chapters. Number one, he's preaching to the choir, so so it's like, oh, nice, nice. Somebody who kind of sees it the same way as I do. Obviously, there's some differences. I think he is much more academic than I can possibly be. But the instincts that he is very clearly communicating, in some places, in some instances, it definitely also clarifies some of my own sort of stabbing at the dark, sort of more instinctual feelings about practices. Once again, I think he's a tremendous writer. I think
having read multiple of his books, even in book club, you can really hear him mature as an author in his voice and his confidence in his own ability to just say things without too much worry about or really caring too much about offending other people. He's kind of made it as an author, so he gets to say what he wants to say now without too much filter. But I also think in his earlier books, he was more like, this is more of what I do here. Some of the things that I think now is more like, well, you guys should be thinking about the following, and you should be looking at it, and here's some evidence to that, and I'm just going to speak plainly. And I think that really does contribute to the power of his arguments, because he's speaking plainly without really using a lot of words to try to ameliorate the position that he is taking. He just is making the position really quite strongly and then continuing to then support it with a lot of evidence. And like Cody said, he is someone that um, you can tell that he's writing from, he's beyond just his first decade, his probably even his second decade of practice, and that really shines through. The kind of stuff that that folks like us who are you know who are regularly practicing, he writes to sort of really clarify a lot of things for people who are really already on the path. I think as a beginner, you'll probably struggle with the kinds of concepts that, once again, because it assumes so much, just in the writing, just in the kind of assumptions. I think you can read it, you can kind of grok it a little bit intellectually, but you won't be able to relate to it in practice at all for probably the first, I don't know, 5 years to 10 years. It would be very difficult for someone to really understand what he's talking about. Yeah, I think you'll get it in little increments, right? And every time you read it, something new presents itself. It's one of those every time you go back to it, you get more depth in each of the things that he's talking about. And I mean, there's thousands of things he's talking about in these books. So I think it's really quite amazing, and I'm very yeah, it was a really good read for me. It's a lot of synchronicities as well between what I'm reading and the kinds of stuff that's happening in my practice. So not some, and also this kind of stuff that I've been researching um, outside of my practice, but still within the realm of mysticism or esotericism or animism. A lot of this stuff is like in parallel. So I think there's some synchronicity going on with not only with just going through the book, but also with the timing of these chapters as well for me.
Nice. Yeah, Britannia said the same thing. She'll be joining us in a bit. But she said the same thing you said. There were things that came out outside of even her practice in her daily life that resonated with this chapter. So that was really cool. And I was not able to find any critiques of the book. So I know that was kind of in our last two meetings, we were discussing how this book may cause controversy or there may be negative reviews. That wasn't warranted. So, to the YouTubers, I apologize for spewing that, but yeah, it's cool that, I haven't found any type of hardcore negative comments, like it's not for beginners or whatever. So yeah, let's go through it. Magic is walking on a tightrope. So I think tying the chapter before on otherness and relation to that, I think he presents pretty early on the idea of indifference, right? Or he starts with the doors, I guess. Let's see.
Doors.
Doors. Which I think in Circle we have spoken about before many times. Mirrored doors, at least blacked out doors. I felt like I knew well. And then I feel like I think most of our Sunday practices have open door elements. I think all of them are pretty open doored from what I'm gathering. But George, you could speak on that more. But yeah, it did resonate very true with, like, I do think that that's how it should be organized, approaching a spiritual practice.
So let's talk about because I found that to be very fascinating. The description of quote meditative styles, right, as it relates to magical practice, really is specifically what he is getting at. So in circles, sometimes we'll talk about, hey, we'll do these different openings and exercises, and we'll talk about different styles of meditation, but we never really go as deep as trying to characterize or trying to sort them into distinct buckets of types of meditation. We say that there are as many type of meditations as there are practices, but we've never sorted them. So I'm interested in finding out specifically from each of you, so just in sort of an open discussion as to for you, what specific meditation you do reminds you of the black door, what specific meditation you do reminds you of the mirror door, and what specific meditation that you do that you have some experience with, do you consider going through the door?
In my practice, when I meditate, it's usually in black, like sit to meditate, because I do a very traditional style in Raha yoga pretty much, and I focus on blackout door. Even though Raha has that focus, I haven't really been able to go through that point. I've just been kind of looking at that point of void. I also like to meditate in a more traditional style, like in my room, seated in asana, candle, and just sit silently. I don't do a lot of guided meditations on my own, or things, practices per se. I feel like the mirror door for me is my ceremonial magic. So all of the elemental work has more to do with looking at myself, and I feel like that's where I keep my mind on a daily basis, is kind of the reflection of the reality back on myself and how I can adapt in what element I'm working on at that time. We're moving into planetary, so that's going to be interesting. I feel like open door for me happens more sporadically and not in an area where I can necessarily control right now in my day-to-day life. I do feel like we can get there on Sundays in our circle meetings. And it's pretty, I feel like at least it's very fluid for me to go into that space and easy. And I have full control of, or not control, but I don't feel like my will is being hijacked. I feel like the times that I, have open doored experiences in my day-to-day, it can be chaotic, and I'm grateful for it because now I see it as that, and I'm learning, but it's been, so this chapter is good timing for me in that, to help me ground in how I can practice more open door ways and have a little bit more, even autonomy is the wrong word, but a little bit more intentional presence in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done a lot of the black door meditation for sure, because I used to do a lot of the more Buddhist style. But even that has verged on the mirror door a little bit too, because there is just like the basic, like watching your mind and just watching what comes up, and not really not trying to quiet it, but just noticing what's coming up, like the clouds, thoughts passing as clouds. So it's like there's the black door, which is like, which the training I had was, which is I can't think of the word. Anyway, it's a Buddhist term, but which is like consistently trying to come back to focus on one thing, right? One single point focus, which is like clearing your mind entirely. So, but I never like samadhi doesn't interest me really. So I didn't really that really doesn't doesn't interest me very much anyway. So, and I'm not good at it. That's not, some people are good at, like, they can get samadhi pretty quick. Not me. Like, um, that's not it. So I've liked the Mirador more, and like I agree, like doing the elemental work, LBRP, all that stuff is pretty Mirador stuff. So like a lot of the stuff I did and we did after Jason Louv's class was Mirador, with like, I guess like a lot of that like single point focus from his class too was Black Door as well. Um but yeah, Open Door, I agree. It's like it is sporadic and difficult. It's definitely like feels like a more heroic path to allow that to happen. Um it's difficult for me to go there without like falling asleep and completely losing it, like completely losing any kind of awareness of what's happening. So that's difficult. But yeah, like doing the practices in Holy Heretics, of course, he's like, that's what it's aimed towards, I realize. So like, but it is like right now the early parts is like the purification, which is what he's talking about in this chapter. So that's like, so it's actually like not a lot of actual open door, but like purifying the self to allow then ultimately, I guess, theoretically, for like a more clear open door, clear and safer, I guess, open door meditation.
So Cody, I'm sort of wanting to hear your perspective on where would you put things such as moving meditation or
Oh, yeah.
uh, or stuff that is more like you allow the external to entirely envelop you, right? Where would you
Right.
put that?
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't even considering that, because like that I probably do more, like we'll do more open door stuff with that for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Especially when I'm doing it like out in nature, and like, and even doing that stuff like sending my consciousness high and feeling the wind, kind of like he describes in that first chapter. Um like feeling the demon of the north wind or whatever. Like, but that's similar to like, that's what I'll do with like um my kind of free form qigong stuff that I do quite a bit, actually.
yeah,
Just like taking shapes and like invoking whatever feeling, and that's kind of like, to me it's like, yeah, dancing with whatever is there. That's what it feels like. So yeah, I guess that is kind of open door, right? Because it is like
yeah,
just taking what's there and being with it, moving
yeah.
with it.
It's an interesting way of accessing it as well, right? It's not this, purely mind and mind imagination, and then this, the surfacing or communicating, forming in the imagination. That's much more like almost like sympatheticing it out of the environment, right? You can take a form, and you can shapeshift, and in that you come a little bit closer to that intention, to that shape, to that form, and then there's that sense of otherness, definitely, right?
Yeah.
Something that you can still kind of grab onto, but you don't always, it might just take on its own thing. And in fact, your movement might change in response to that as you're taking on more of those kind of qualities. um it gets kind of hard to slice for me, definitely, because so much of my practices are about the reclaiming of self, um, as basically an other. So I related quite a bit to his description of the mirror as a microcosmic version of otherness. Like, as you're seeing more and more in the reflection, and that was the only way, by the way, that I couldn't even see. I know it was a mirror, but it was a mirror that I could not see a reflection from in the beginning stages of my practice. So a great deal of it was trying to even put that silver sheen over the glass so I can see any kind of reflection. And subsequently, what I saw was completely alien to my conception, to my ego, to my character buildup. So much of it was repressed, right? So much was inaccessible that it's like I was shoved right into the other practice fairly early on. But this other resided within, they're not like just purely outside, right? They were mostly just aspect of me that I did not know. Well, I couldn't know because I have no access to them. But so I'm actually, so this is why this all this stuff really resonates with me in a more macrocosmic scale, because that's that, of course, you step more and more outside as you discover those otherness aspects inside of you, and you really dig pretty deep, and then the logical next step is the rest of the otherness, which is the greater otherness, I would say. But the blackout practices, I have a pretty extreme version of that. It was actually required for me, the black door, because actually that's what I encountered when I first did the mirror practices. What I saw was blackness. So because I have no ability to see even the reflection. So my solution to that was take that to the extreme, which is the complete eradication of the ego, the complete utter erasure of the ego in meditation. So taking it to the extreme in the black actually caused changes to allow the formation of the mirror for me. So I have an interesting path into both of those particular methods. But because of that, I would say I'm not really that much of an expert with other, like the greater other, as I call it. That does not come easily for me. It doesn't. It just has historically not been something I can access very easily. Although I say that, but every circle, that's exactly what I do. Kind of like you, Cody, say, oh wait, isn't what that, like every single week when I'm doing something like that, that's kind of like what's going on there. So yeah. Circle is interesting because I'm like, hey, I have a really hard time doing this, and then for the next like 45 minutes I'm doing it. So there you go.
What do you define as the extreme otherness? I mean, I think
otherness is that other that does not originate from yourself. Yeah. Okay. It's the greater, or that you are coming to a better or a different definition of yourself would be another way of kind of saying, or according to somebody like Long Milo Duquette, right? You don't know how big your head is. The greater, right? It goes way beyond like your subconscious. You might be accessing things through the subconscious or filtering it through there, but it's not where most people would normally consider you, right? When I'm tapping into circle, that's not me, right? It's coming through me, but it's not me. It's like there are things that I'm saying that just comes out, like it just comes out. I can tell that it comes out through my words, but it's not entirely of me. So it's a really weird and distinct feeling. It's like it's like I'm half there, half out of it. I have to still be there, right? So I can still speak. Although I suspect if I'm not there, I can still speak. It won't be me speaking though. Yeah. I'm not sure I would be able to come back and say, oh, hey, let's talk about what we did, because I think I wouldn't know what we did. I think I would just be gone, right? Or I may be able to sit and watch what's going on, but I think I would be gone. I think I would, George would check out and something else would be speaking.
Avoid George.
Is that the essence of channeling, when people channel stuff?
I think there's definitely aspect of that is going on in every circle. I think I don't it really does not feel like it's totally me. Like I get that real strong feeling that it's not really entirely me. It's something having to do with the circle and its characteristics at that particular time, and everybody who's there, and what it is that they're needing. It feels like, yeah, I would say that it's conscious channeling, if I have to label it, where I'm still there, but it's kind of like it's not entirely of me.
Because it's still you enough that you're speaking English and
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, so
And I'm
you're
still
able,
using my words, and
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
still applying
infuse,
techniques and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah,
But the
yeah.
content is it's like unplanned and free form, and yet there's always some kind of structure there, right? I'm always surprised at the end, right? Like, what was that all about? Hey guys, what was that all about for you? You know, I turn right back around and ask it as I'm trying to piece it together, as well. So
So cool. It feels like it's like a pool of everyone's energy, and there's contribution to each,
yeah.
each point. So I'm
And
glad.
I think that energy also attracts otherness, right? And the
Mhm.
otherness is coming in and sort of enhancing that experience, or taking it deeper, right? Or trying to meld it together and provide a useful way of working with something. But yeah, I the intention is for me, only intention is what the circle needs. And generally things happen. Like things happen, and I'm kind of just facilitating. So I'm actually the moderator in that as well, in that I'm just kind of, I participate, but it's a team effort. Like, not only of the circle, but also of the energies that are coming in and providing instruction in that way. But I was definitely labeled that as other. They're not, these are not like, it doesn't feel like a teacher. It feels like other, like something else, right?
It feels like other.
Yeah, it feels like other. Yeah,
What's
you kind of mentioned it as well, Haley, right? Sometimes you go to that other space, but because of the way that it comes through, it generally is pretty controlled in circle.
Mhm.
It's like there's like barriers being put up, and it's like you're being shown like a very curated experience of something.
Mhm.
And that, but I feel that it's pretty safe. Whatever is happening there, it's pretty guided and it's pretty safe.
Mhm.
Although I have no idea what is being guided really most of the time. I
Mhm.
only have to piece it together just like everybody else afterwards. So
Mhm. Yep. Britannia, I mean, that's our initial question was, when have you experienced the blacked out door, the mirrored door, and the open door? But I know with your recent studies too, I mean, I'm sure what we're talking about super pertains to what you're learning right now in just guided meditation, hypnosis practices, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've all kind of encountered each one of them individually and like some forms of them, like he said, that are a little hybrid. And I think some of them lead, like one door leads to another door. Depending on how much you're like able to expand with yourself. Like, do you ever have those meditations where like for for either a thought or letting go of a thought or just for absolutely no reason that you can recollect, like you feel the space that you perceive just grow, like your inside your mental brain like is more vast, like it's like I don't know how to explain it. Like I've had it the other day where it was like a spontaneous feeling that my awareness was way bigger than it used to be, like in a sense, like I felt like this feeling of space like change within myself, like physically I felt it, and it was really weird. I was like, whoa, it's so cool. But I mean, I feel like for the black door, I think that's like it's a tool to use for when you need to like banish, like it's like the equivalent to banishing, like when you want to like clear out like your mental space and kind of like ground back or touch back into like where you are when you don't know where you're at in like a mental or emotional space. Like I don't know, how I feel or what's going on, or like I just feel overwhelmed or something. So you take a break and you do the black door. I feel like the mirror is for when you feel like reflecting upon like yourself or your life or a decision that you have to make or an experience you had that you're like you're not sure how you feel about, or you're like sorting things out. But I feel like once you get past that, it's like layers of meditation. Like if you go to a deprivation tank, there's like 10, 20 minutes of you kind of checking in with how you feel, how your body's feeling, how you're mentally and physically feeling. And then you go to this like mirror section of the meditation in the deprivation tank, where all you're seeing is like your own thoughts and feelings, and like you're reflecting upon your life and your decisions, or like what you're doing. And then you get to this point where you like you're past that, you're like farther out of yourself. And so once you've kind of gone through that like tribune or like trial of fire, you get to a place where I think purification is important in that sense of like positively conducting and resonating with the other. Because I don't know, there's this quote that says, I'm looking for what's looking for me. And I feel like that kind of resonates in the other world a lot, because where you're at and what you're feeling and what you're kind of like projecting out, like you're transmitting a vibe outward of like your core essence of like who you are. If you strip everything off yourself, even your soul, like you strip yourself down to like an anatomical nothing, and you have like that purification process to help guide you towards the things that are looking for you, and the things that have messages for you, and the things you're supposed to hear and say and translate. And I think that's really important. Instead of being manipulated by the other, you are engaging and experiencing it, like he said. And it's a really safe way to like know that you're doing like the right thing or going in the right direction. It's like a way of having a compass. So I think that like I've had all those types of experiences, like just in a deprivation tank, but like throughout my life, like different types of meditations or magic is like required to like overcome or deal with an obstacle, or something, like I think one of my favorite examples is writing. I do creative writing, and there's some times where I literally feel like it's not me. Like George said, there's something else, like a conduit, like you're a conduit. And it really like I write stuff down in my like notes even now, like but like my creative writing, you'll just get in this flow where you feel like something else is writing and using like his analogy with the pen and the hand. I was like, that's literally how I experienced creative writing. Like that's like how I started writing, and I started doing it as a kid. And it was just like this overpowering urge to have to write this thing down that just came to me. And it wasn't from me. It was like it was weird. In like high school, I had this journal that my friends would like, they would just like love to read it, because it was like wisdom that I could never have. I was like in high school, and it was like not a high school kid, right? Like writing. And so it'd always be fun to see like the little quibs or like parables or weird things that I had in there, because it was like this knowledge that was not mine, but it was like endowed to me to like share. I don't know, but it was like if I didn't write it down, I felt like it was like bad karma, because like I'd get punished or like some. Yeah, I just knew that not something bad would happen, but I felt like it wasn't good to like not write that down. Like I like had to write it down. Like even if it was like the middle of the night, I'd like jump out of bed and I had like a notebook right next to my bed, and I'd always just be like writing. Like like I'd pop out of a dream and like write something down, like in some half sleepy writing, and then I'd wake up the next day and be like, whoa. I wrote like a whole short story when I was like asleep.
You hear about conduit maintenance. You got to keep it going, or you'll lose it, because the
Mm-hmm.
other loses interest, given that there's no expression, right? They're extending, you're extending, and this connection gets stronger over time. And you hear this sometimes as people talk about working with their gods, and really doing the things to deepen those relationships, so that those communication channels come and you can trust them, because you have spent the time to really explore those spaces, those connections. And I'm a firm believer in that you have to You have to extend, right? You have to really go out there. You have to explore your own limits with respect to how to bring that in, how to ask them to intercede on your behalf. You have to actually reach, right? Reach for them. The one thing I want to add to this before we kind of go to the next thing is that for me, mindfulness meditation very much belongs in the mirror sort of door analogy. I guess it seems like the perfect description of what happens. Like just being mindful lets you see all the stuff that is going on.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agree.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment too, like that your comment about or what you said, George, about seeing otherness in yourself and what he kind of talks about, like, and then how like you do realize that we're like your individual self is made up of so much, it's so much bigger than what we think we are, you know. It's like, and it's so much more other than what we think we are. Like actually what we think we are is just like a tiny piece of ourselves, whereas the vast majority of self is actually other, which I just think that's a really interesting concept. And ultimately, like, I mean, you can make like the philosophical argument that like we're all just part of divinity, right? So like, so it's all is like you could make the argument that it's all one anyways. So, which is it, but like in this multiplicity, it's all
And
one and not one at the same time.
you could even say, right, to become individuated is to become other. I mean,
Yeah.
you're limiting just by definition, right? To get the singular perspective with some kind of timeline and embodiment. So the essential act of distilling yourself down to an embodiment, I think it's the act of becoming other, that momentum of being other, and then we just continue that momentum through life, right? By limiting our choices, by adopting limiting beliefs, by pushing out shameful or unacceptable part to at least to the society or people around us, isolating them and essentially make them disappear, right? They're not really gone, but in my case, much of it I just lose access to them. There's no pathway to them, so they can't express. It's like I know they're there somewhere on the property, but I've cut off all roads and built moats and stuff like that, so they can't come out. But they're there, right? Because you have to maintain those moats, and that has a cost, right? And finally, there's so little room on your property from all these things being penned up in all these places that you have nowhere to go. That's how I felt when I first started my exploration. That it was not. It became too small. There's not enough light coming through. There's just what was left felt like a shell. Didn't really feel like anything that I would want to continue for any amount of time. So I had to. That's why I engaged all these things. Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that takes us to the next part of the chapter pretty well. Like once we like the imagination, like what we're like building of ourselves, like trying to like hang on to versus like letting, like being able to kind of let go into the void, or like the imagination, um what the imagination kind of creates of ourselves to like maintain kind of selfhood in the midst of the like ever encroaching abyss of otherness, right?
Yeah, something I really relate to is he's talking about these forms of the human will, and we're trying to impose order. And I have embodied experiences of the eradication of form and what that does, right? It's imminently scary because you really don't know what's going to happen, because there's no handles for control. There are no knobs. There's not even the pretension, because you just eradicated the self. I mean, there were points in the beginning parts of my practice and in the removal of the shell of myself, where it was so alien that I can't even relate to my own consciousness in the moment. And so the consciousness goes. So it's nothing but void. It's just darkness. And that's that I took it pretty extreme. I took it pretty far. That's because I think I was in such an extreme place to start with. It required an extreme solution. But I have that embodied, like when I read the chapter, I had that, resonance, right? Oh, okay, yeah, he's talking about that sort of flexibility. But the flexibility he's talking about is really removing a lot of the safety, right, from the from the system, from the things that are keeping you coherent as a pattern in time, right? As a signal, something that's identifiably you. So, but that flexibility really does open up all kinds of things that are inconceivable or undetectable or unknowable from before. You do just like with anything else, develop a competency for it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've redefined myself so many times in life as well, just in different ways. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've had some pretty visceral deaths in a lot of capacities. Yeah. So, I've completely eradicated versions of myself at different points in life as well. So that's always fun. I do feel like I tend to run on the, very like my mind goes to imagination places often, like more often than, so mine's more knowing how to, I mean, I don't think in any delusion kind of part, but I more need to watch how much my imagination can run away with me. So this chapter was good on just creating a little bit more definition in those spaces of imagination, fantasy, speculation, how those intertwine. I mean, I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. This is where he talks about that, right? Or is that a little bit later on, maybe?
That's a little bit. I think that that's the progression. So it's good that you laid it out.
I mean, and I use those words often, and yeah, they can be. I think in this part, he was saying they're so interchangeable in our modern kind of language, but they do have very distinct flavors to how they form your reality, I would say. So yeah, I mean, my fantasy does go on the side of airy passion or airy lustful, but then the grounded part of that does lead to like actual fruition and manifestive power. So that's really cool to see.
So,
yeah.
so the part of that I want to I think is really interesting is the reason why he sort of pointed out that in modern times, imagination and the use of imagination has become the way that it has, right? I think one of the specific things he says about that is that's because the other was completely eradicated from the concept of imagination. We became the central point from which imagination is basically, it's a top-down thing from you to your will, your consciousness, to your imagination. You're in full control of that, and that's the only version of that we have access to, really. And it's been suggested, and he kind of traced through the history of that. But I think that's a really interesting observation that he makes, right? Because that's not something that you tend to think about in that way. It's like, oh yeah, that does imply that the otherness, right, as a source that can communicate through imagination, is really a thing that we talk about a lot, right? You find it in bits and pieces of other places. But no one ever talks about it like, oh, in relation to otherness. This is one of the reasons why we have trouble in modern time and modern practice with this concept. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that's like I think it's really interesting because I feel like I've felt maybe led astray in the past with the magical path of like conflating even like self with will in a sense,
Mm.
right? Like, and like using my imagination to like uphold myself as a will that can like control things, that can control my reality, that can um like dispel symptoms of this and that. And like so much in modernity, that's what we're like, in like all the self-help and all the like, it's all about like increasing your self power so that you can have power over all these aspects of yourself, like all the life hacks and all that, like, which is like, that's what we're taught is like is magic. And that's like, and that is like overcoming otherness entirely and like really reifying this like sense of self, and like, and just reifying your own like your own fantasies and imagination, and like going out and getting what you want and all that. And like, and even like Genesis Peorage was big on that, which is interesting. But I feel like she did it in a way that was is different in some way than like what we're taught. Like,
Who's that?
and there's like some subtle different. That's
Jason's
Jason's
teacher.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
psychic TV,
Yeah.
the chaos
And
code.
there's like,
Yeah.
and I think there's a place for that, and that was like really important for what it is. But I think like magic needs to kind of move on from that a little bit, because it's like so like individual, it's like so much individuated that it's like it loses. And it is, and it's like that's where, and a lot of that actually turned into a lot of that self-help like life hack stuff. Like a lot of the people that have like took that on in that generation, and like the Gen X, all that Gen X stuff was like, is what like we're living with now, of this like hyper like individual like trying to get yours, you know. And it's like, and it's fed into capitalism, like just the capitalist machine of like consumerism so well, that like allowing the other in to me feels like ethically better, in some ways, like a counter to that, like, but I mean, who knows ultimately, but it just feels, that feels right to me, like on. And even like what he said in the first chapter, like you shouldn't take money for your, basically you shouldn't take money for your sorcery. And that's, um I think that's like, he's already like trying to guard against that, um that inclination with magic. But like, and yeah, like that Eliphas Levi quote that he does, like that he's like countering, I think is what we're getting, like where he said the quote is, he's talking about imagination. By its intervention, we heal diseases, modify the seasons, ward off death from the living, and raise the dead to life, because it is the imagination which exalts the will and gives it power over the universal agent. So it's like exalting self over like like the divinity, and that's like, and that's building a tower. You know, again, it's like it's just, this is, a lot of this is resonant with the previous book we read, which I think is kind of interesting,
Yeah.
in this, in where it's going.
I noticed that too in this chapter. It was giving me very meditations on the tarot vibe for a second, but in a good way. I was like, ooh, this kind of bridges things. But I think people are afraid of tapping into that other, because it is not a comfortable feeling. So yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, at least the people I know who take a lot of that route of, I can be in my will and, you know, use my imagination to do whatever I want kind of stuff. I find that, you know, embracing the other is really a hard idea for them, because something that's not quantifiable, or they can't put, you know, things on is, yeah, I mean, I think for anybody, I mean, it scared the Jesus out of me at some point. So, but my mind I don't know, for some, my disposition wants to naturally go there. When I do imagination and other work, it's not, I don't feel like it's, I mean, maybe I'm deluding myself, but it doesn't feel like it's for me to have dominion over some territory, or for me to, like, it feels like it's coming from like a genuine curiosity kind of standpoint, and more of like a, how can I, because I like to change myself too, because I've done it so much. So like that doesn't really scare me anymore. And I mean, it makes me uncomfortable, but not, doesn't like scare me to like go into that space further. which is a good thing, I guess.
Yeah, for me, much of the discussion around exercise of the, this style versus what he is sort of describing stuff that came before. For me, that is really just describing the difference between something like a left-handed path, right, to then something that's a little bit more ecology focused, shall we say. Even though I think people have different definitions for what left-handed path is ultimately all about. For me, it's left-handed path is microcosmic in my worldview, and the right-handed path is much more like macro, where you matter less. It's more important that you find where you can be the where it is appropriate for you and where it isn't. And the left hand is much more about, well, I'm picking what is appropriate for me and what isn't. So the kind of power relationship or the subject, right, as he puts it, using all of his terms around I, you, and it. I think that's he has a more evolved version of that, one more level of nuance to that than my typical like it's me based or other based, right? Like there's at least a transitional stage there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I resonate. Yeah, middle path working is that's how, I mean, that's how I see those kind of balancing out. And maybe that might that not, I don't know if that's necessarily the it or the otherness that he's talking about per se. I mean, maybe actually maybe.
I think if you're connecting to God, that's about as other as it can possibly get.
Okay.
Like so yeah. That's the, I mean, that's the ultimate, you're connecting to the stuff, right? The kind of unknowable, like you can in an instant be destroyed type of, like, just from, like, just from tapping in, like you are so small and it is so like immense. And that's, I think that's the ultimate, like tapping into the divine, like trying to tap into the ultimate, like the stuff that makes everything, the stuff that everything else is composed of. It's about as other as you can possibly get, because not only are you moving further from that point, like he had that diagram, it's the totality of that, right? In infinite combinations and all possibilities, expressed or not. I mean, that's ultimate incomprehension. Like, this is why I think mostly people need mediating agents. They have to invent these mediating agents because it is so uncomfortable. I think we as humanity, materialized Jesus, right? He became a confluence that we needed for progression because it is so terrifyingly unknowable. And before that, we had, the prophets or some of the folks that came first, and then like the beings that are like at least we personified over time, but they didn't start out that way. But at least they were more knowable than the divine, and so that we tend to interact with them, like for example, angels, right? So yeah, so yeah, other. That God is other, like as other as you can get. Like, yeah, and I'm not talking about God as the God is the conceptual God. I'm talking about God as, the beginning, the end. I mean, everything, right? The stuff, right? The us,
But then this book, of course, is like, yeah, like he's definitely aiming at like connecting with the divinity, but like maintaining the rootedness as well. Like, so it is like he is a middle path. And I think the tripod is like the tripartite, what he gets into with the speculum, the chalice, and the rod, because you still maintain the will of the rod and like the like container of the heart, right, of the chalice, and then you just like clear the speculum. And the speculum is kind of like that ability to see through, but you're still maintaining like some containment and some grounding. That's my take on that. And I think that's really like, and that maintains ground, that maintains some kind of ground while you explore these otherness.
Agreed.
Certainly gives you pause and consideration for basic things that every ritual will have you do, right? For me, banishing takes on a very different definition, right? Banishing is not, the directionality of banishing becomes more diffuse. Like banishing is so that you can, it's almost more for return to the normal state rather than rather than you're like, like ejecting something, right? Because I mean, let's be honest, right? What's your actual ability of actually ejecting anything that you cannot possibly like relate to or even kind of understand, right? So for me, a lot of banishing work, a lot of the ritualistic work is so that it provides you laddering to come back in some kind of way that you are still a coherent pattern of some sort at the end of the day. So there's a beginning, there's a middle part, there's an end. And in that there is a very well-known structure for you to return after you have sort of deconstructed yourself during the ritual, after you have connected with another, then you're coming back, that you have to lather and step down yourself back into that place. And that banishing is really more for yourself than for anything else. You're banishing essentially aspects of yourself that you have altered to some degree, so that you can come back to coherence. So once again,
Yeah.
it's hard to, it's like this point would be made, and people would kind of be scratching their head if they're kind of beginners in this, because this is not a beginner concept. In the beginning, you should think of banishing as, I'm banishing something out of my circle, right? I'm pushing it out, right? Because that's just where people start mostly. So
Yeah, that it reminds me of the quote, the Paracelsus quote in here, where he's talking about madness, right? And
yes,
so like the imagination just running away with all kinds of wild ideas, and like concretizing that's the word, concrete, making like the ideas concrete and like as if they're real, and then operating in life through those ideas. And I mean, we're all doing that. Like we're all kind of delusional on some level. That's, because in coherence to cohere our reality, and especially in like I think especially in some ways in democratic countries where we're like supposed to like solidify our identity around political ideologies and stuff, which are like so much is pure fantasy of that stuff. But we kind of have to in order to like cohere in society and to cohere culturally too. I mean, we have to do that. So, um, but so yeah, it's like, so I guess a lot of this the great work is actually like banishing a lot of that stuff from our circle.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I mean, I just like, yeah, the next section of, I feel like this chapter really, resonates with a lot of things that we've discussed over the years. So I'm very grateful for it. For example, like clearing the glass of our soul. Like, I feel like, that was something like we've talked about in Circle, but I know Irene's talked about that a lot in her practice, of how like wiping the lens. I just love that one time where she was just like saying how, she's just kind of cleaning the lens so that seeing the divine that way. I mean, that really changed my perspective on, what it means to do those type of cleansing rituals of different sorts. And that's how I would see any invoking or banishing ritual as like really a cleansing of some sort in terms of LBRP, I guess, and like working in the microcosm of those spaces. Like you really are filtering and refining and, honoring and, honing in on something that for a clearer vision. So I really like that. Yeah. And I like that he used, the quotes that he used.
But it can be really difficult. I mean, like the pitfalls are really frequent, like because you can get so like I always think of the chariot card, right? Because we get like we can get like so into the vehicle and like purifying this vehicle, and like that like we then become like ego, like we build our ego around this fantasy of this vehicle that we're using to become enlightened or whatever, to like clear our lens, and then that's like itself its own like block to the it's like that actually creates a like quite a huge stain on your lens, but it's like a stain that you can't see because you think you're seeing through the lens, but you're like still, you've like suddenly built up all these powers that you're able to use, and you feel like so open, but like the limitation is still there. I've definitely come to that a lot in my practice lately too, especially like I start to get all like righteous about the path that I'm like and then that feels weird, and I feel tension inside, and I start feeling like this like almost combative style or defensive, and then I start like spinning out into um inner conflict, and that's that's not good.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting in terms of like integration with with environment versus like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, not even versus, but maybe because I've felt that way as well at some points. So yeah, I think I mean, where my mind goes is like, you know, as we start to integrate with divine or maybe otherness type of qualities, we start to lose grasp on like what integration with like where you're at looks like. I don't know. I mean, that's where my mind takes me there in terms of pitfalls. Maybe I haven't experienced it as hardcore, but yeah.
Yeah, this is the reason why after so long of practicing that now I make no distinction in practice and not practice. Everything I do is practice. Everything is infused with aspects of the practice. So my daily earthly existence is absolutely magically infused. It's taken a long time to do. Because they seem so separate in your mind's concern. In the beginning is useful and actually probably required for most people to keep them well separated as you sort of find your footing. But once that practice stabilizes, then for me it was really important. I instinctually knew this. I think I have been told this as well by guidance. That part of my part of what I need to do, part of the reason why I'm doing this, given my chosen vehicle, is because I came in with a lot of spiritual callousness. So, and this this iteration is supposed to be a school to learn how to do it better, how to improve that. And so for me, it's really quite important to keep everything in the real, right? Everything that, and I'm looking for signs where things can potentially be getting off track in its reflection here in the physical world, because the reflection is it's hard to miss, right? It's easy to read. It doesn't come immediately, not like in the astro, when you're like when something you feel changes like the scenery and like changes every like even the representation sometimes of the otherness. In the real world, it doesn't come as fast, but you will see it everywhere, and that's why I tend to fuse now. It's taken a long time, but to fuse everything I do as magical practice. There is, and if I cannot relate my magical, my spiritual practice to it, I tend not to do it in reality. That's actually I would just throw an activity away because it's not something that I get to practice. Practice my spirituality and see and be checked in a very physical kind of way, so that the physical is absolutely included. And there are other people in the physical world that can also give you very concrete feedback as well. So in that way, in the physical otherness, right, that you can relate to, you can also get some feedback. balance you out. One of the reasons why we have circle is for me to guard against that sort of that sort of isolated, self-important achievement, or all of those things that can really take you sort of off of your development, take you slightly on a detour, or maybe very far down the detour.
Yeah, I'd like to get to a place where I feel like I can infuse magic into everything I do. I don't. I have a really hard time with that.
Yeah.
I have too many addictions. That's right. I blame it on my addictions. Can I infuse my addictions with magic?
I feel like I try to. And I think I have bouts of being really in tune and bouts of being very not in tune. But I think that that's also a reflection of inner turmoil or some working that needs to be kind of like adjusted. And so I tend to run towards things like that though these days. Like, I mean, yeah, in terms of my social life, which Prashani could say, like, it's like the things that are making me the most uncomfortable, I'm kind of running the most towards right now, because it's like, I need to figure out what the heck's going on, where there's some things that could lead to potential like actual astral danger. I don't know. I mean, just hearing through grapevines of what nefarious activities go on, but it's kind of like, I feel like it's important for me to run towards it right now. I don't know why.
I mean, I think you've been practicing for years now, running towards it, right? When you encounter the unknown all the time, then you become comfortable. You develop that comfort with your own ability, one, and secondly, with you have built up a rich experiential, embodied sort of confidence and strategy for the unknown. One of the things I say in Circle is, the things that make me the most uncomfortable are the things that I know that I need to do the most. And if I have to prioritize tasks, I'll choose the one that makes me the most uncomfortable. And there's a caveat to this, that I feel like I can handle, or it just pushes me slightly beyond what I'm ready for. It has to be slightly bigger than my current comfort level, right? So that it, I know, at least according to my evaluation, what that there's always that positive stepping forward kind of motion with encounter, so you never stagnate for too long. I feel like for most people who practice magic, this is something that they report probably pretty commonly. You hear people say, right, magic is about accelerating chaos in your life. So you better get stable fast. Buckle up, right? Because you're essentially saying, give it to me, like as fast as possible. Drinking from the fire hose, I'm ready for it, right? And when it gets turned on, you really know whether you're ready for it or not. So it's all of the little steps leading up to the turning on of the fire hose, and then so to me, that is one of the best sort of you can feel it definitions of magic. It's about increasing the rate of chaos in your life, so that you can maximally optimize yourself to try to accomplish as much as possible in one lifetime, in terms of your spiritual development, in terms of your effectiveness, right? In terms of your self-realization and otherness realization.
That actually just makes me think about, like, maybe the addictions are a way of like actually halting that chaos.
Yeah. Some sense of control.
Of it. Yeah.
I mean, that's why I do the things I'm addicted to, is to self-soothe from the things that have made me so uncomfortable that day or that time period, which, I mean, I think in doses of that, that's great. Like, I don't know that there's like that much wrong with some of them, but some of them not so much. But it's just understanding the balance in that, because you need some space to like be able to recoup and regather, so that you can assess what move, where you want to navigate next, and how uncomfortable that actually did make you feel versus not, or what was like, necessary to drop or necessary to go forward.
Right. or if you're able to, right? To when you say, right, here's my circle, here's my boundary. Okay, in relation to my addiction, the things that I like to do repeatedly, the things I'm telling myself a story that I have no control over, right? When in fact it's just a conscious decision to surrender that part to that. I think the operative question I always check myself with is, can I demonstrate to myself every once in a while that I'm on top of that, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to do it anymore. Can I do it, right? Yeah, and for me, that translated when I first started encountering those, it translated to like pretty harsh practices, such just fasting for long periods of time, right? Because I realized food was a huge. It's like it's not just food; it's like specific things that are in our food was a huge addiction for me, right? So caffeine, but caffeine addiction goes away pretty quickly. But the really challenging ones were like starch, like sugars, salt, fats. Like these are the ones that are much longer, and it's only. But I had to do a pretty harsh, like a practice, like a thing to do to try to discover the limits of those. And I think the point here is that with addictions, every once in a while, it's that. Hey, I'm looking at you, addiction. Are we still is our contract still being upheld, right? Is the balance of the contract still what I think it is? And if not, maybe we need to renegotiate, right? To put it in the most like business termy, like because I do tend to do my magic there too as well. So
Yeah, and bringing it back to kind of the will, like I that's definitely not something that has really worked for me, is like trying to exert my will over these things. Like just being like just pure will, I can will it. Like I got it's fasting just has never worked for me. So I just think that's interesting. Like, and I guess I can bring it back to this chapter a little bit, where like, yeah, it's just like doing that is its own kind of delusion, I feel like, to some degree.
it is
because for me that's been my experience.
Sometimes that
once you
third
really
go ahead, Tanya.
Oh, sorry, my phone keeps breaking up. I was gonna say, I feel like sometimes like realizing that you don't need something as much as you think you do gives you the power over it, instead of there being like a power struggle, or where you feel like you're addicted instead of self-soothing. Because there's a difference. Self-soothing is what it is. You're soothing yourself, but addiction is where you're kind of out of control of it, And I think that there's like an indication that you want to be out of control, and you feel like that's kind of like what's happening in your life, and so you're kind of mirroring your external chaos with your internal habit. And once you realize you don't need that as much as you think you do, it kind of breaks the spell of whatever that hold is that thing has over you. Because I mean, I feel like, when you're younger in college and you like want to go out and drink a bunch, and you realize, hey, like I don't need a drink. I can go out and have fun without drinking, like, or I just don't even need to go out at all. And then you realize I don't need to even go out. And like it's like you're slowly peeling back the layers of the things that falsely anchor you into a place of stagnancy too.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, I definitely understand that. Yeah.
I mean, I think for me too, I've been kind of preparing myself I mean, my big thing is nicotine, so, and that's going to be a gnarly one when it happens, but because I've already tried a few times and like hasn't really worked. But like, I do think that in relating to what you were saying, like Cody, with like in relation to otherness, like, I mean, my mindset was maybe I could use this addiction as a sacrifice to like propel some form of magical practice that I don't have access to while in this addictive pattern. Not saying that I don't have like, I mean, for me, it's like my, union with my holy daemon is something that I like know that I really want to do in my practice and that I'm working towards, whatever that looks like in my life or whatever, form that takes. I mean, that's stepping into the unknown to an nth degree, but I know that I don't want to be a smoker on the other side of that. So like, that is something that I will have to, sacrifice in order to have this be a part of my integration process. So like, I know in my framework of my head that that's kind of where I'm going. And I mean, or I could use it for something else. I mean, I do want to quit kind of soon. So like, this is something that I'm like working, the momentum is being built, and that's how I need to kind of framework it in my head to have it be navigable for me, or have a path, or have some bigger purpose that reaches the other in some regard.
Hey, Britannia, you have a practice. You have someone to practice on.
Oh, you can hypnotize.
Yeah, with the hypnotizing. And I was gonna say one of the things that you could do is a lot of people that works with addiction is trading, but it has to be an upgrade. So like you don't trade in your old car for an even shittier older car. You know what I mean? Like you're upgrading, like George said, like you want to expand yourself outward a little bit. So if you're trading or sacrificing your smoking, then you know that you're doing it to be able to like expand to be better. So like that's like a self-motivating thing. And also if you're trading the security of smoking, which is like obviously making you unhappy now, for the security of the connection with your holy daemon and like that purity that you'll feel after you quit smoking, you can constantly use that as the carrot to like keep you from smoking, or like make you mentally not want to, instead of it being a like, oh, I physically like have to get over this, hand to mouth thing. You're like, taking control of like the action by, using your mind to control the hand, like it was saying in the book a little bit.
Yeah. So Haley, work with Britannia.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So she can get some.
Homework.
She can get some
Homework.
practice, and it's gonna do wonders for the both of you. And Haley, remind me to give you the Phoenix ritual.
Ooh, cool.
Phoenix ritual.
Nice.
And I think like, and I'm liking this book, to bring it back to the book and Holy Heretics both to get together. But like for me, these practices are really good for all this too, because it is like, it's not trying to like conquer symptoms of the addiction, or it's not like even like the idea of purifying isn't like, I'm gonna like, and what I like, oh, I'm gonna bring it to that last
Cool.
quote,
Speculatio.
that last Paracelsus quote, where he's like, it's not about casting all these external things out. It's about like cultivating something internally, like cleaning your soul internally. And to do that, of course, and of course I'll get into it in later chapters, but like connecting with divinity. And like that's it. Like in so many ways, like really like connecting with that like vastness, the light of divinity, the whatever it is, the neither nor whatever. I mean, in the Holy Heretics, the first practice is, I'll even say it now because I think it's like relevant, but the very first practice in that book, on the first chapter, is chanting, like basically in prayer, uh, for I am who is neither dark nor light, neither true nor false, neither dead nor born, neither here nor there, neither found nor lost, for neither is who I am. So it's like chanting that, and it's like that, like, and it's an amazing practice because it like opens up this space that's like, that I've never really felt quite like that, like the spaciousness where like I myself is still there, and I still have like, I can still hear my inner voice, but it's like echoing in vastness. It's like it's there, but it's like doesn't.
Can you send that? I love that.
We should
Yeah.
we should read that book maybe off to the side too. I don't know. Holy Heretics.
I
That
really
sounds
enjoy it.
amazing.
But I'm kind of like stopped at a certain point because I haven't had a chance to do this one like crucial ritual that's in it. So like it's like the fourth chapter or something. But
Mm.
it's kind of it's somewhat involved, and I just haven't had a chance with winter and stuff. But
Side
that's
quest.
cool. It's like that's the beginning, and that's kind of it's the practice of agnosis. What he calls agnosis. So it's like um the idea of like saying the names of God and then negating them, so that like, so you're kind of never taking a side, and you just kind of like, it's left with this kind of open nebulousness. And that's what I feel like is like, that's like really helps to clear the cobwebs in a really simple way. It's sort of really interesting practice for that.
Cool.
So yeah, and that's directly, I think, related to what he's talking about in this chapter and in this book is like how to clear the cobwebs.
Yeah, well, let's get into the, oh yeah, were you gonna say something? Oh no. Let's get into the last section, right? Speculatio, fantasy or inner vision. So this is where he really crystallizes the definitions, right? Between fantasy, imagination, and speculation. Can someone, so this is where I maybe had questions. I definitely have questions on the orientation of the, illustration on 135. I think I was just kind of confused on inner man being on the side. Like, how do you all interpret that picture? And I'll kind of put it up for our viewers in case. But I think the part I was kind of, when it says physical man and inner man, where nature is kind of in the outer realms and divinities, it's saying, is in more the inner realms. It's just interesting that those are flipped. I think I get really caught up in diagrams too. So let me know if this is just me hyper analyzing this one picture and being like, wait.
I see like a you know how like light always like crosses. It always like it's like the
Oh,
lateral. So like there's actually like these like um like opposite beams of light coming in and illuminating the opposite side.
oh.
I think.
So it's like nature's looking at physical man, divinity's looking at inner man.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then the half circle is the physical man looking at nature. The half circle is the inner man looking at divinity.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
And it's kind of like he even says in a footnote, they're all ultimately they're both the same thing, right? But so it's kind of like there's this unfolding thing that's happening too. It's a really interesting diagram. It's like something you can kind of again, like yeah, like George was saying, stare at this diagram. There's like all sorts of Rorschach-y things to see in it, but
And it's
Well,
so
I
like,
think it's fun to like watch where your eyes go first, or like the way you kind of perceive it versus what he means by what he put on the paper. And that way, because you can, it's kind of like you said, like a psychological test to see what you see first is probably your tendency.
So let me just ask you guys this then, since we're looking at this diagram. So how do you interpret the red? The red on that diagram?
uh,
it looks like the blend between, what we know and what we don't know. Like it looks like the conglomeration of all of it. Like this
like
is
the Venn diagram.
Mhm. Like pointing to the overlap.
Yeah. Cody, any thoughts?
I hadn't, like there's some that diagram has definitely been puzzling to me too, so I hadn't really like fully considered what the red is.
Britannia?
I always thought well, for me, I think there's like, it's almost like the shape of the eye and how they were talking about how the mind is like the eye, which sees divinity. I think that was kind of what it felt like to me. But I don't know, you know how we talk about like there's like the horizontal and then there's like the vertical? It almost seems like that's like the eye that sees divinity, where like there's the eye that like sees like the third eye, where it's like your like astral eye, but then there's like the eye that you don't, that is a receiver, like he was saying, as like a receptive organ versus like the eye that like, I don't know. He had like an analogy earlier where he was talking about the eye as being like a receptive organ, and then how he moves on in that quotation to make it more of like a physical thing. So I think like the red eye is more of like the deeper eye, the one that receives, versus like the black like shaped oval that's more solid line.
Agreed. Like the
Okay.
pineal gland in between your two eyes is what the red eye seems like to me. Like it's like honing in on that vision.
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree with all of you. So go ahead, Cody.
Well, he does say there's like a 180-degree flip, right? From out to like looking out to looking in. So there's like the eye that's horizontal is then flipped 180 degrees. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
at
When
some
I
point.
when I looked at it right first, when that jumped out at me, the first thing I thought of was the third eye. But in the context of the chapter, I think of the speculum, the lens, which is receptive, but it is enlivened by the holy fire. So it is both receptive and active, although in different aspects, right? Active within man, receptive outside of man, right? So to relate, we have to internally be active, and I think that's why it's vertical, because it is that thing that allows the two sides to come together. It is the thing that links the you and the other, so to speak. So it is that passive active entity which completely ties into this chapter, which is talking about reception or receptivity versus activity, right? The imagination, but does the imagination originate from the human, or does it originate from elsewhere? Something that I sort of alluded to at the very beginning of this talk. Like where did that come from? Like where was that me? Active imagination from human working in the imagination, potentially, and some of the dangers that he lay out are becoming delusional, entirely untethered from the ecology, entirely untethered from the situation or the context, because you're simply spinning, right? In imaginal realm, based out entirely out of yourself. So in some sense, you're entirely ungrounded. Um, you can't be grounded yourself, but you're the only reference point. So, and if the source of this, the source of this information, the source of this activation is from the outside, then it's not just you, right? There is something else going on. There's some kind of other thing going on. I think this is all within this chapter, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. But I think you're expanding on the idea of like an interaction, where I think where he's going to go, and maybe the next few chapters is like, how are you interacting with the other in order to, have your imagination be something that reflects the other in a way that's intentional, maybe, or
Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about with like having that like vibration that you're putting out, so you can like intentionally like attract the right energies to work with.
absolutely. I like that you said the fire though with it. So that's just
Yeah.
on that, because that now I'm like, oh, it's red because of the like fire of divinity. It's cool.
Yeah, now I'm getting kind of a hint of like containment of chaos. So yeah, the speculum makes sense that that's kind of where that is. It's held, and there's like in the heart too, because it focuses you kind of in, it holds you into that heart space, whereas outside it is kind of like gets into more chaos. But I also like can't help but like think about this image as something that has been unfolded. The other that like it could be flat. It could all be folded together and just make a line, then like fold it again to be nothing or something. Like it's where there's like, so then it's like all unfolding from the heart or something. Like
Oh,
then,
Lotus.
then there's a,
Well, and I like how he said that like you have to hold on to like God, and like his like definition of God was really cool. But it's like almost like the containment of it is like that focus on like holding on to like that divinity or like to that perspective instead of straying backwards.
Hmm. Where does
and
he
then
define God?
what?
Where does he define God in this chapter? That's
Well,
He
yeah,
he
because he was
talks
talking.
about, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
He talks about God not as the traditional concept God, but God as the source of emanation that infuses all. I mean, it's
okay.
so
It was
it's,
such a perfect, beautiful, eloquent definition that I was just like, yes.
Wait, find the quote and then we could read it. If we don't mind. Sorry.
if we
And it
can.
was in the middle. It was like near the middle of the chapter.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I mean, just my understanding is he's like also operating from the, I mean, a pretty classical um understanding that God is actually indefinable. Like and again, it's like the I am neither is that agnosis. It's like you can say all these qualities of God, but God can't have, but then like God isn't the qualities at the same time. Like
I mean,
God
yeah.
isn't. God is born and dead. It's like it's and like kind of coming to, and there's like, and that gets to like the indifference part. It's like you can't, like if you take a side, then you're like putting yourself into, you're like, by defining God, you're putting like your own human interpretations on God, and that's limiting God when God is limitless.
Hmm.
And even saying God is limitless is giving God an attribute, which is, and these are really classical philosophical theological
That's
things
why they don't like people drawing Muhammad,
way back.
the
Yeah,
prophet.
yeah, yeah. Islam has like really sophisticated
They'll like kill you. That's why
philosophical
they
arguments.
shot Hezbo, is because he
Yeah,
drew a comic with Muhammad in
yeah,
it.
yeah. But that's like, yeah. And then there's like Sunni and Shiite differences and sectarian differences in how you can define God and stuff too. But it's like it's a very well trodden debate in Islamic philosophy in particular, but it's in Christian philosophy too. It's just Christian philosophy. Well, both Islamic and Christian philosophy have like got got kind of narrowed by powers, by manipulative power structures that tell you how it's supposed to be versus the more open versions that got um persecuted as heresy.
Hmm.
So
Thus, holy heretics.
yeah. So I have to point out this quote because I just chuckle hard. My hope is that through such practice, and he's talking about the simple practice that I think Josephine McCarthy sort of outlines. Such practice and perspective, we can begin to see where magic truly resides. So many outer manifestations of magical practices are nothing but monkey play, as Paracelsus rightly says. In most cases, they're harmless, often useless, and nothing but a distraction from the work that actually matters and ultimately creates magical impact. Right? The latter is not measured by the level of sophistication and variation of our outer paraphernalia, but by our ability to handle, to fuse together, and to successfully operate the inner tools of our craft. Yep, I think, I think that says that basically like a scathing sort of critique of much that has been handed down to us and much people are using as source material upon which they're expanding or expounding on or improving upon. But he's really getting to the bottom of it. which is like, yeah, all of these things that you do, all of these regalia and ritualistic actions and tools and all of this stuff, mostly it just doesn't really matter that much. Yeah. But once again, as I said last time, you can't get to where he is talking about without going through those necessary preparatory stages. Yeah, it's yeah. While the critique is meaningful and true, I think it, when somebody is reading that too early, they will lose out on everything that the training methodology is offering them as they are laddering themselves and scaffolding themselves towards a more stable practice. I feel like those aspects, those tangible aspects, those prescribed aspects are very, very important in the beginning in terms of pedagogy
Well,
and pedagogical device.
And I like how he references Josephine McCarthy's work as a good reference. Like it does feel like the constant kind of reiterating of their, kind of, I mean, he did specifically say Queria in earlier chapters, but I feel like keeping it kind of in that direction, at least kind of references to new folks. Like if you do want to go through the steps, like we got a step laid out for you, like,
we have a whole
I feel like
program.
that was conscious, and like feel like it's tastefully sprinkled in there just in case, people really have no idea of like this stuff. You could be like, go over here,
Yeah, go look at that stuff if you want to know how to practice this. He hasn't really gotten into much in terms of practices so far. I think it's just been an exposition on the proper perspective to be taking. But I mean, this is not, once again, to translate this into practice require you to have already practiced something before. I think this is not that beginner friendly.
I do wonder if Holy Heretics is, though. But I feel like it's got practices that I feel like are pretty simple to begin with.
Yeah, but Cody, how much experience have you had up to
Yeah,
this point?
well, I mean, chanting the yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. Chanting that chant, and it's not just chanting. There's actually like some preparatory stuff for that too. Some envisioning, like flame envisioning and stuff like that. But and like creating a void and stuff. So
I feel like it depends on
yes,
what
it does. It is the first. Now that I'm talking about it, that first practice is relatively complicated. It's not just chanting those words.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be able to hold some ability to like create a visual space and create a void and stuff like that.
Well, and also, I mean, the words that you said are very challenging in a great way, in a way that like really wants, Britannia and I to go get that book and like figure it out, But it's like for somebody that like can't have their mind rocked in that direction in the beginning.
Yeah.
You have to also have a little bit of mental agility to be able to say like, I am all and I am nothing, or whatnot, like whatever that was. Like those polarities can really flip someone on their head if they don't like, have their necessary like emotional well-being in check or whatnot,
Well, I think like rituals that are more like structured are helpful for like grounding and orientation. Like, I mean, like the Kabbalah cross is like a really good example of something that's like not only grounding, but it's expanding, and it's also gives you like an orientation in a place where you're not a physical thing, which I think is really important to get that kind of baseline. Especially, I've had a lot of experience meditating and like shamanism and like the Eastern philosophies. And like I've read a bunch of this kind of stuff before, but never on this level and not to this degree. And I think that that's kind of like because of the orientation that you get and like that kind of grounding nature of like doing those practices too, because like you said, it like George said, it's like kind of like that maintenance of like kind of bringing it back to yourself, like in a weird way where like, I mean, you're bringing yourself, like, I don't know, for me it feels like I'm condensing and shooting outward at the same time, but it's like you're kind of letting other in and yourself and thoughts and like everything's kind of like has this flow, and you kind of get to interact and experience it at the same time and observe. It's like all three, but getting to juggle those and then being able to adventure like in an intentional way, I think definitely takes like preparatory steps. Like even that ritual, I could definitely be down for that ritual, and it sounds like accessible to me. But I think if I heard that like a year ago when I first started talking with you guys, I would be very overwhelmed and been like, wait, what?
And like, what are we practicing also? It's like, if I were to be like, hey,
Yeah.
let's read Holy Heretics, and like not, you don't know anything else, like it might be like, what are you, I mean, just from, I don't know, folklore and rumors and stuff, like it gets a little bit into like sketchy territory for some people, I feel like, that have a lot of like boundaries up around this type of work.
Yeah,
Well, and if
because
people don't have a grasp on themselves, I feel like it's easy to like slip into that mental illness of like you hear the whispering others, but then you're like you turn crazy. Like I can see how that could become a thing. If you have like if you have no grounding or orientation in your own reality, then like you're trying to go to another reality and be more oriented there. Like I don't think that's gonna happen. If you're not oriented here, you're not gonna make it there.
depends on how
You get lost
fragmented
in the
you are.
sauce.
Like
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah, that's
naturally
true.
fragmenting, you're used to constructing alternate realities or and being pretty comfortable there, right? As an escape. I think a lot of esoteric people are this way. They're really quite used to constructing the alternative that then they run into, right? Like VR, I just put on the goggle, Ready Player One style, and I just hang out there for a long time. But I think I mean, in my observation, many of the people that go immediately, almost immediately presents with some kind of distress are the folks whose world and mind are are tenuously held together. If you just pull one or two pins, the whole thing is going to come crashing down because those things because the structure is just unstable. And they're barely holding it together, and generally they run into quite a bit of trouble. I also think folks who are really good at association run into quite a bit of trouble. And grounding, of course, is another reason why people don't, they have nothing to keep them tethered to something that's reasonably operating on the physical level. That also gets into I think this is what Britannia was mentioning, that they're untethered and ungrounded. There's nothing for them to work back to. They instead just continue to progress forward in a physical reality and friendly way. This is the reason why many training systems start with Malkuth, right? Yeah, you want to shore that up before you start to go into the more rarefied places that is potentially more volatile, so that you can really really firm up that foundation before you start to catapult away from, before you go into the 37th ether, right?
Yeah. And it's kind of, I guess a lot of this stuff is actually like is maybe that upper triangle too. So
yeah, I mean, you just, once again, this, you aim high, yeah, of course, but know your limits as well. Right? It's a process. People just want to get there as fast as possible. That's bad for your health. That's bad for you.
Yeah. I've done that before. I can tell you from experience that like you don't get it like it's almost like a weird fear. It almost like gives you like a phobia of going back because you weren't ready that time. So you're like scared and like not ready. And like I don't know, yeah, it's pretty horrifying. But once you get through it and if you come out triumphant, you're like, oh my God, but you're like, I don't want to do it like that ever again.
They're better, there are safer and ultimately faster ways of doing it based on safety.
Yeah.
And this is why I think it's so important for most people to consider some kind of physical basis to their practice, because in the physical you can very quickly demonstrate to yourself what you don't want to go very, way beyond your limit, right? Imagine a stretch going way beyond your limit. Your body will be protecting you all the way up to your limit. So you'll be going through extreme pain, and then you push past that, and then you'll be out for the next year because you just broke something, right? You just snapped something. And there, in the most real, most concrete way, you learn about why you don't want to go that fast, why you don't want to go into something that you're absolutely not prepared for. And this is in a way that you can relate to, like in physical pain. You don't need to go like, oh, I think this is really affecting me, or I'm really being haunted by all these like astro baddies that are attached to me. And these things are a little bit more intangible. Instead, you can just directly experience it in the physical as a reflection of all of those other realms, except you'll be in pain and it sucks. And you will very quickly know that you've gone really wrong. Yeah, huge proponent of when you start your magical practice, you should take up the physical practice as well to keep you really, really grounded, like for reals grounded.
That reminds me, there was a story I heard once and about someone who got Rolfing, and they were really like, before Rolfing, they were like really closed, like their back all very hunched, like closed. And the Rolfer, and a Rolfer will open you up, and they open this, they like physically open this person up. And then this person like started getting they like that's when their schizophrenia hit.
Yeah.
Like when they opened up, it's like they're like physically protecting themselves, holding it in so that that doesn't come in or something. Like that was the idea. And like when this Rolfer came and just opened them up physically, like, yeah.
What's
Which is
Rolfing?
Rolfing is, it's structural integration, so it's like hardcore. It's like one of the most hardcore like body work techniques where they will like get in there and like literally like move your bones like into alignment and stuff. It's like it's really intense.
Yeah, all these things should be done gradually and within your tolerance level. Nothing should be done. Well, I mean, unless you want it to be done to you, I think you shouldn't take away people's free will of getting things done to them. But for it, as in most things, the fastest way ultimately is by taking it at a pace that is you're pushing yourself, but you're doing so at 80%. I mean, this is something they teach you even in gym class. Like, don't go too far beyond that, like, because you ultimately just hurt yourself, and then you have to do this all over again after you recover from your injury. And I think this is the perfect like advice for anything that we do when we step into areas unexplored or unknown, right? And especially this type of work where they can seriously change your orientation, to the world and your belief system. Then I mean that's 100 times more important that you start to recognize some kind of limitation within yourself and work within your limits. It's not a I think that he even mentions it, right? It's not a competition. How to do if you can get there faster. It's about making it through it, being able to get through it. Being able to make consistent progress.
And I've seen a lot of like, there's a lot of yoga teachers and stuff out there that will like, especially with like Kundalini, where they'll lead people in these practices. Like, here's your first Kundalini class. Do these things. Like,
Yeah,
it's
100 reps
like
of fire
kind of,
breath.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like let's just raise your Kundalini up your spine today. You've never done any other spiritual practice. Like,
that's when people get really, they get uncontrolled. I mean, damage and all kinds of different damage, right? Depending on where you're seriously blocked. But I mean, they're like pushing like these really hardcore breathing practices and sometimes the muscle contraction practices. Like, dude, slow down. There's no rush here. You can damage someone pretty seriously.
And teachers have been known to like purposefully do that stuff just to have power over people and stuff, to then be able to manipulate them and all that fun stuff.
All that fun kind of stuff.